Yo! Stop your grinning and drop your linen. Found them.
Perhaps one of the most shocking scenes in James Cameron's Aliens was arguably the mildly abysmal plan, but certainly very poorly executed search and rescue mission, orchestrated by the United States Colonial Marines. This incredibly brave but ultimately hopeless operation was launched to seek out and rescue the remaining colonists on Hadley's Hope on LV-426, who were revealed by their personal data transmitters to be under the main cooling towers within the atmospheric processing station. This entire chapter in the film does a tremendous job of ramping up high levels of suspense while completely subverting the audience's expectations, as we follow these bold colonial marines unknowingly into the heart of the alien nest. What makes these latter scenes within the chapter so traumatising and also extremely frustrating is that in mere seconds we seem to go from bad to a goddamn shitfest. How can this be? What went wrong? You cannot kill that many good guys off at the start of a film, surely. Well, let's talk about it, shall we? Firstly, what I would have given to see that APC cannon in action, I tell you. What could have been, right? They could have set up shop on high ground and lured the critters out. We'll just put that down to budget issues perhaps, and the fact that it may not have made much sense to the plot, fair enough. I always loved how the monitor feeds displayed everything with this eerie sci-fi blue glow. Aliens has had so much criticism regarding the amount of film grain used and the fact that much of the blue tone effects do not process too well with that amount of grain. They go on to describe washed out colours and blacks not truly being black. Some folks feel the movie hasn't aged well because of this, but honestly it's never bothered me as time goes on. I've always been of the impression that it lends so much charm and character to these scenes that just makes them even more spooky and foreboding. This method is so much more appealing to me than what we see nowadays with this crisp and clinical style of shooting films in a digital format that just looks absolutely lifeless to me. Let me know what you think, am I right? So the manner in which these Marines deploy and progress their way through the subsystems is almost like the movie decided to flick on an integrity switch. We'd seen them goofing around many times before this on board the Sulaco, and now we were watching them suddenly adopt a different mentality. Remembering their training and taking the mission seriously was a sudden wake-up call we needed to remind us that we were watching an alien film and the stakes were dangerously high. The reason why I mentioned before regarding these scenes and their ability to subvert audience expectations is that we are lured into a false sense of security as we watch these seemingly elite troops with their state-of-the-art badass weaponry making their way into the complex like it's just another bug hunt. Simply another day in the Corps for them. As the tension and suspense grow naturally in the build-up to this chapter's climax, I think having placed the audience in the bubble of a false sense of security only adds to the confusion, despair and heartbreak of what will soon happen. Between the sounds of radio static and footsteps, you can distinctly make out the beating heart of the station.
You got the point. Hicks, watch our tails. Nice and easy. Those corners.
The pulsating of electronics and machinery still very much in use adds much character to the surroundings and just makes the place feel alive. I have always found it a horrifying sight on the scanner display when we can clearly see the body count difference between the Marines versus what essentially are unknown targets at this point. After all, they are looking for the colonists, almost like the other entities that boast a stature of 7 foot, having acid for blood, sharp teeth, claws and a deadly tail all covered with an exoskeleton were sort of an afterthought, you know. It is possible that the crew did not take the threat as seriously as they should have, which we know now was a mistake that cost them dearly. None of the troops appeared to show any kind of hesitation or anxiety about placing themselves right in the middle of a situation that severely lacked any solid intel. So far, it is only through Ripley that the audience can share and experience the worry of potential terror to come. Her facial expressions and tone of voice acutely sum up the danger that Lieutenant Gorman has naively put his team in. The elephant on board is that up until this point there was notably enough evidence to suggest an extremely violent and chaotic encounter would ensue, just based on the enormous destruction the acid burns had left breaching through multiple floors, as well as the fact that the entire colony minus Newt had vanished in such a short time. Her warning alone of "they mostly come out at night" still haunts me to this day. Maybe it's simply the childlike innocence of a statement trying to depict something far too grave for any adolescent to comprehend. In either case, it should have triggered some alarm bells and maybe prompted further questioning and analysis before departing. Ripley had only encountered one of these creatures before, but it must have strongly occurred to her, and you would hope the rest of the outfit, that because of the evidence witnessed so far regarding the creature's life cycle, from egg to facehugger to killing machine, there was always going to be a high chance of these things multiplying and becoming an overwhelming threat to such a small squad of Marines. As much as I love most of the characters we meet here, and let's be honest, the whole goddamn movie rocks, which is an obvious statement to most people, I know. If we only focus on this moment in the film, it does baffle me how unprepared and naive the Colonial Marines and the Lieutenant were in both their attitudes towards the mission, as well as the tactics and communication used on the battlefield. I suppose, on a side note, it does make me wonder if the company knew all along that the Marines, as well as their numbers, were unfit to deal with such a potential threat, or had the company already seeded bad intel and poor decision making into the plan before deployment on LV-426. We know that at least one member of the team, Burke, was sent with specific company orders, but surely they were also aware of Lieutenant Scott Gorman's inexperience and outright incompetence before appointing him leader of this expedition. I mean, how many combat drops did he have that weren't simulated? You tell me, man. I suppose even though we know that the top dogs at Weyland-Yutani cared nothing for the lives of these doomed Marines, not to mention the overwhelming danger these xenomorphs would pose to any military group. The one thing that I cannot forgive and still bugs and confuses me was the squad's complete lack of attention and respect during the mission briefing when Ripley did try to warn them all about the sheer deadliness of the creature's biology, as well as their possible formidableness in great numbers, as that was always going to be a factor since losing contact with the whole colony on Hadley's Hope. As the Marines get closer to their objective, all the warning signs are there that something extremely malevolent is waiting just around the corner. The spectacular display of secreted resin, as one Marine points out, is horrifying to behold. Suddenly they're not in Kansas anymore, and the hive-like transformation is more than enough to inform them that whatever secreted this amount has to be either very big or simply large in numbers to refurbish such a sizable area. This, combined with the knowledge that these bugs have acid for blood, must have started to play on the minds of some of these individuals. Close quarter combat was slowly becoming a major factor now, and none of these troops had been equipped with any form of protection from such a chemical hazard. Even though Ripley once again did inform her superiors, as well as Gorman, of this crucial and life-saving information back on Gateway Station in Earth's orbit. Suffice to say, we are positively seeing a pattern of either some military incompetence at play or purposely implemented company orders designed to sabotage, possibly both.
Look, this whole station is basically a big fusion reactor.
The next part is truly the beginning of the end. Just before the numerous shovels of proverbial excrement go hurtling towards the ventilation fans, Ripley, albeit with good intentions, decides to announce another danger she has just observed, one that poses an immediate threat and on a much larger scale. Not being able to fire any of their main weapons because of the risk of a thermonuclear explosion is not just a handicap, it's game over. Although perfectly valid, this gives the Marines yet another huge disadvantage, and perhaps the biggest reason thus far for them to abort this mission immediately and turn back. It would be handy if they had some of those pups right now, you know, the technologically advanced gadgets that Ridley Scott decided to throw in the timeline, I don't know, about 80 odd years before this film. Interesting. But this is the moment when Lieutenant Gorman genuinely displays his lack of experience and decision-making prowess under pressure, ultimately dooming his team to a fate that could have been avoided. Of course, the only bastard with a hard-on for this news is Burke, as he has now been granted faster access to possible alien impregnation and embryo smuggling, which means promotion in his eyes. But at least a few of the Marines had their wits about them. Vasquez had secretly stashed away a couple of battery packs which would power both smart guns to function correctly, and then there is Hicks with his home defense close encounter shotgun. These acts of sneakiness were one of the two main reasons why not all of the group would perish in this chapter of the story. The second reason, as we shall soon see, is all down to Ripley being a badass bitch. And I gotta say, seeing the film in today's higher resolutions really shows off the hard work and effort put into the practical effects at the time, and also demonstrates the importance and realism of this method. Especially disturbing is the woman who has been hoisted about 18 foot from the ground and cocooned within the grossly dripping resin for the chestburster experience. I think I'd rather take an acid bath any day of the week compared to that fate. But although the secreted resin from the aliens was supposedly a protein-based substance that hardens upon drying, in reality the basic material construction of the sets built for the film using moulds, latex, foam or any other easily malleable materials, as well as a lot of slime, can never ever be replaced with digital CGI. Not if you want to have that impeccable visceral quality that Alien so effortlessly flaunts. The second unfortunate they discover, cocooned and about to give birth, delivers a harsh lesson to the squad that there will indeed be many of these oversized critters, but sadly it is a lesson too late. This particular scene was achieved with the actress poking her head out above the body model while somebody used a hand puppet to control the chestburster. Notice as well that in James Cameron's version of Alien, the newly birthed alien has much longer arms than Ridley Scott's design. This was intended to provide it with better functionality and the ability to escape its host more easily. I also think it makes more sense in terms of proportionality as it grows. Rest assured though, the actress was replaced by a full body model just before the flamethrower is fired. As for the prop master's puppet hand, that's another story. Uh-oh, now they've done it. There is one aspect at play here that I don't think has a definitive answer but remains very thought-provoking. How were the Marines able to get so far into their cosy little nest without alerting any of the xenomorph warrior sentries, or even the Queen if indeed this is the same location she was present in at the end of the film? Perhaps part of their survival strategy when food sources are low is simply to hibernate and wait for nearby disturbances before waking up. That being said, it also amazes me how little the aliens need to feed, unless the dead hosts hanging on the walls are then used as food after their purpose has been served. I do hope these questions spark a sensible debate in the comments section, please. I'd love to get involved. I think it is a great achievement on James Cameron's behalf that he was able to utilise the less is more strategy by not showing too much of the creatures in some shots where it is dark, making our minds work overtime to fill in the blanks. The very majestic and nightmarish silhouettes of the drones slowly unravelling their bodies are some of the most ingrained images I have when remembering this film. Then also within the same scene to reveal them fully in all of their glory and still be able to frighten and invigorate the audience remains a fantastic feat in filmmaking. Rapidly we see the Marines lose composure as Sergeant Apone tries to ascertain a position on the enemy using both Hudson's motion tracker readings and the utterly useless infrared helmet display, which tells us that the xenomorphs did not have heat signatures. It's well worth mentioning at this stage how important the casting of Alexander Matthews was for the role of Apone. His booming voice, which housed many layers of authority as he dished out commands, wasn't learnt from acting school. He had previously spent 6 years in the US Marine Corps and was promoted to sergeant during his tour in Vietnam. With 13 combat awards and decorations, including 2 Purple Hearts under his belt, I feel like he truly lent his life experience and expertise to this motion picture, and all the love Aliens has received from fans over the years is partly a debt owed to this man and the performance he gave. The same can easily be said about many of the other actors involved, as there were no weak links among the cast. Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn, Lance Henriksen and Bill Paxton are my personal favourites. How about you? That being said, if we were to criticise the character of Apone, then there are a few chinks in his armour demonstrated tragically as he now decides to neglect his team and the perilous situation around him in favour of trying to maintain comms with the incompetent Lieutenant Gorman. In doing so, all hell breaks loose. With multiple team members already flatlined, it becomes down to certain individuals to step up and get the remaining troops evacuated. Corporal Dwayne Hicks, who does a much better job of staying frosty, is now effectively in command after Apone's demise. Technically, Gorman still has seniority, but with communication so diminished due to loud gunfire, and the lieutenant still too busy sweating disbelief into buckets, it's left to Hicks to regain the squad's composure and retreat. Vasquez and Drake thankfully don't hold back.
Let's rock!
Their precision fire from the waist-mounted smart guns is essentially the group's main and only real arsenal of defence against the encroaching beasts. So when enough is enough and we finally get to see the Colonial Marines' firepower in all of its glory, not only does it provide some well-needed relief in such a dire situation, but the impact of armour-piercing rounds shredding the xenomorphs is a sight to behold. The dazzling smoke effects and acid blood spray were created by using gallons of yellow dye for the blood splash and the mixing of certain chemicals and compounds, such as titanium tetrachloride, cyclohexylamine and acetic acid for the smoke effects that beautifully fill the whole shot and dirty the frame enough for it to look very authentic. Many of these alien suits were comprised of simple spandex with hardened layers patched on to represent the exoskeleton. The reason for this was to provide mobility to the stuntmen, dancers and body performers when acting, and in doing so Cameron could inject so much more life and character into these creatures than was possible in the first film. It cannot be overstated how formidable most of the female characters are in this film. Both Ripley and Vasquez play integral parts in getting this unit back to safety. It must have been a tough call for Ripley to heroically drive the APC further in for the pickup, knowing that in doing so, if any one of those things got inside, then it would mean the end of not just the entire company, but also Newt as well. It was clear from the moment they discovered Newt that Ripley had found a new sense of purpose on this mission, especially after learning about the death of her own daughter while she drifted in cryosleep, and therefore would be unwilling to just sit back as an advisor to the others. Once on board the APC, their struggle is far from over. Thankfully, the vehicle manufacturer saw fit to equip the APC with time-consuming heavy manual doors that require 2 personnel to open and close, leaving Hicks in the risky predicament of having to use his shotgun at such a hazardous range for him and his team. This scene where the alien thrusts its head between the doors was actually filmed backwards in order for it to work. Michael Biehn has spoken on this in the past about the complexity of movements by multiple actors in the shot, as well as timing the stunt with the animatronics of the creature itself. The genius of James Cameron in such a dilemma is his ability to problem solve, and was therefore able to create the desired effect by filming most of it in reverse, without spending time and money on an endless amount of takes just to nail the choreography. The special effects involved in constructing these scenes, up to and including the mighty Stan Winston, should go down in history as some of the great innovators in film. Sadly, this kind of talent is more of a lost art these days, as we see blue screens and digital tracking markers replacing this kind of ingenuity and craftsmanship. As the remnants of the group desperately make their escape out of the facility, one last opponent stands between them and relative safety. Who this individual was and why he was stuck with the humiliating assignment of door duty remains a mystery. The unintentional act of Gorman knocking himself out along the bumpy ride was probably the most useful he has been up until this point. However, he does get to redeem himself a little later on in quite a spectacular way, so we should probably lay off the poor guy for now. Why exactly Hicks tells Ripley to ease down on the gas so soon is strange to me. The acid burst from the unfortunate door sentry had obviously caused irreparable damage to the underbelly of the APC, and continuing a little further was not likely to cause any further harm to the vehicle. Plus, with the looming threat from leftover Hive members, as well as the small possibility of a reactor explosion, you would think a little more distance would be sensible. Originally, James Remar was to play Hicks, and had even filmed a few scenes before his departure and replacement. He was fired by James Cameron because of his drug addiction at the time and the discovery of a bag of cocaine on set, which he later admitted to. And you know what? In most cases, you would normally say that a film wouldn't be the same without the actor who starred in it, but I honestly think Remar would have made an amazing Hicks. However, after Michael Biehn's driving performance as Reese in The Terminator, who else was Cameron really going to choose? I feel Michael was perfect for this role because he had the look, voice and calmness of someone who could lead, make important decisions and listen when Ripley or the others were able to offer up solutions. So there we have it, just another crazy night for Newt on Hadley's Hope, and an incredibly traumatising experience for the surviving Marines, who are now left confused, exhausted, and with a desire to blame someone for this mess. Vasquez in particular doesn't hold back on Gorman, as she no doubt believes the avoidable loss of her friend Drake was down to the last minute and unexpected orders delivered by the lieutenant that put them in such a vulnerable position in the first place. Just when they think the situation could not get any worse, the icing on the cake is that they now begin to learn some members are still alive.
Don't leave our people behind.
I ain't going back in.
You can't help them.
And as Ripley tries to explain how futile any attempt would be to rescue them from the same fate as the colonists would be, reality surely begins to set in over this colossal fuck-up. So who was to blame? Was it the Marines with their lack of attention and maturity when briefed about the seriousness of the threat? Or was it the incompetence of leadership that was the downfall here? The chapter ends with discussions of what the remaining crew should do next. Top on the list is the suggestion to nuke the site from orbit, which causes Burke to almost burst another blood vessel. This is when he starts to show his true intentions, but I'll talk about that in another video however. As for this chapter, the rescue mission in James Cameron's 1986 Aliens, that's a wrap. I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. In the meantime, stay safe and stay entertained. See you next time, folks.